really honored to have been given the opportunity to say a few words of introduction to the program featuring Mabel Williams and Kathleen Cleaver. Kathleen Cleaver has strong roots in this community. Welcome back to Oakland, Kathleen. Welcome back. And as many of you know, Kathleen became involved in the civil rights movement through her work with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee many years ago. She then played a major role in the development of the Black Panther Party, serving as the first woman on the Central Committee of the party, and in many ways the public face of the Black Panther Party. And I don't know, Kathleen, whether I ever told you this, but when I was a graduate student, I almost got arrested several times because the police thought I was you. Over the last years, Kathleen has combined her legal expertise with her educational activism and general social activism around issues of justice. And I'd like to especially acknowledge the work that she has done toward the freedom of Mumia Abu Jamal. And many of us are anxiously looking forward to her memoir, Memories of Love and War. Mabel Williams represents, it seems to me, the generation that enabled the work of organizations like the Black Panther Party. She is a part of what we might call the subjugated history of Black movements for self-defense, the foremost representative of which, of course, was her late husband, Robert F. Williams. We often trace the civil rights movement beginning with the 1955 bus boycott and the subsequent development of all of the nonviolent strategies we associate with the civil rights movement. But as that movement was emerging, Mabel Williams and Robert Williams in Monroe, North Carolina, directed an NAACP chapter which decided that they would stand up and fight back against the Ku Klux Klan. Now, Robert Williams, Mabel Williams were aware that the promise of radical Reconstruction in the 19th century had been destroyed by the 1877 Hayes-Tilden Compromise that led to the disarming of Black people in the aftermath of slavery. The work they did in Monroe, North Carolina, and I remember the kissing case. Those of you who don't know it, you should find out about it. Their work in North Carolina, which led to their subsequent exile to Cuba and China, inspired people, Black people all over the South, to participate in similar efforts. There were the Deacons for Defense and Justice in Louisiana. And I remember growing up in what was called the most segregated city in the South, Birmingham, Alabama. I remember the armed patrols that nobody really talked about that much, but in order to prevent figures like Bull Connor from urging the Klan to bomb and burn homes in the Black community, people gathered every evening and patrol the community. I can remember my father taking out his gun when it was his turn to participate in the patrol, and that is the way things were. So I think that this evening we'll hear about some of that subjugated history of movements for self-defense that enabled the emergence of organizations like the Black Panther Party. Let us warmly welcome these remarkable women, Kathleen, Cleaver, and Mabel Williams. Thank you.
I am so happy to be with you tonight, and I just want to thank all of the sponsors of the organization for inviting me here. It's more than 50 years that I've been involved in the civil rights and human rights struggle, and I came into it kicking and screaming. Actually, I was a victim of the racist and segregated society in Monroe, North Carolina, where we had our black schools, our black churches, our black preachers, our black teachers, and I loved every minute of it, and I didn't want to have nothing to do with white folks, period. And my parents, like most parents, black parents during that time, did everything they could to protect us from the evils of that segregated society. But I fell in love from high school with a guy who had a totally different outlook on life. He didn't think that he should stay in his place and not, and submit to segregation. Well, I fell in love with him, and we got married, and one evening we were sitting around listening to the television, to the radio, and his father told me, he said, "Mabel, you know what? That man thinks he ought to be president of the United States." And I said, "What?" And Rob said, "And why not? I'm a man, and he's a man. Why shouldn't I want to be president of the United States?" So I knew then my life was about to change. So we went trying to make a living in the United States, in the South at that time. The power structure did the same thing, ladies and gentlemen, that it's doing today. It allowed women to have a job, albeit a meager job, but they denied our men the right to have economic independence so that they could support families. So they were, at that time, trying to keep us in our place, where Robert wasn't going to stay in his place. And we had all kinds of problems with him trying to get jobs, and they're giving him a job working on in construction, and had a white man over him who could neither read nor write, and he had to fill out his own timesheet, but the white man was a foreman, So I won't go on and on about that, but I just wanted to tell you about what the beginning was. And when I say I went into it kicking and screaming, it was because I was thinking that I should stay in my place. But Robert had other ideas, and I grew from that, and I developed as the struggle developed, as we began to fight against the racism of discrimination, individual, and then it spread out, and I began to get a consciousness that followed me all the way to Cuba, China, through the Soviet Union, Vietnam, and back home again. And I am so delighted to see young people here today and hope that we can inspire them to continue the fight, because that struggle, there are evil forces out here who want to see us not make any progress. They want to put us back where we were and where I used to accept, and we say, hell no, we will not go.
I believe I was extremely fortunate in that I had parents who had been involved in anti-racist struggle. My mother, from the time she was, I think, in high school, and definitely in college, was involved with Southern Negro Youth Congress, boycotting and protesting school segregation, working in unions, and my father, who she married in some 1930s, I think. I don't remember. I wasn't there. He was involved in East Texas agitation of NAACP campaign against the white primary, all-white primary, which is successful. And it was a struggle that both black and white activists were engaged in Texas, which was probably, outside of Mississippi, the most racist and segregated part of the United States. So I don't recall much about living in Texas, but as a matter of fact, my very first memory, which is in Texas, is of being in a car, and there's this atmosphere of fear inside the car because my father is speeding to take my brother to the hospital, and it's dark, and we're stopped by police. And that's all I remember, is that there's this sense of tension and fear, which is really interesting. That's the first thing I remember, and it never leaves you. I grew up at least a little bit in Tuskegee Institute, where Booker T. Washington had sort of created this insular black world. And what was odd about it is that in Tuskegee, the black people were the best educated and the most well off. And the white community was less sophisticated, and a boycott there was boycotting against all the white businesses because blacks couldn't vote. Blacks with PhDs could not get registered to vote. Whites who could barely read could get registered to vote. So there's boycotts, and I kind of grew up in that atmosphere. And then in the 50s, my father joined the Foreign Service and went to India at the behest of the United States, which wanted to show to a third world country, you shouldn't align yourself with the Soviet Union, you should align yourself with us. And they wanted to show that they were not as racist as the British by sending black, what do they call these? Black, I can't think of the English word. It's, no, not diplomats. They're people who work in community development. My father was in community development, technical assistant, technical. Anyway, it's foreign aid. And so I happened to be in a country that was a brown country in which they ran their own government and named all their own streets the way they wanted and had a tremendous culture that had become independent of white rule. And I was about 9, 10 years old. So this is what I'm seeing. And I'm seeing Vietnam and hearing on the radio about them overthrowing the French, and hearing about the Algerians overthrowing the French, and hearing about Nasser, kicking the British out of Suez. So when I'm a child, I am absorbing the fact that people of color don't have to be ruled by white people. And so it was over with. White supremacy was finished. I wasn't any good to go back to Alabama. My inspiration to join the movement was being in high school in Pennsylvania, and reading the papers, not watching TV, reading the papers about the Almaty, Georgia movement. I don't know how many people here remember that, but it was extremely intense, and it was a campaign of arrest, jail, no bail. And young high school kids kept getting arrested, protesting that their families could not register to vote. And I would see pictures. I saw a photograph of this 3 young women in high school, and they were smiling, and they were going to jail, and they were singing, and I was just so taken with that. Well, they were standing up against the racism. They were saying white supremacy is finished. I wanted to do that. That's what I wanted to do. It took a while. It was about 1966, a little bit after Black Power. I was in New York. I got to join the movement, and it's like learning. It's like your life transforms. The minute you get in, it's like you're constantly bombarded with new ideas, debates, discussions, and it's never stopped.
There were 2 little boys, 8 and 10, playing with some white people, little girls and boys out in the meadow, and a kissing game ensued. Well, the kids didn't think anything about it. One of the little white girls went home and told her mama, "Mama, I was playing with Hanover today and I kissed him." Well, her white mother got all excited, started scrubbing her mouth with soap and water. And when the father came in, she told the father about it. And the father got upset, and he got his shotgun, and he got with some of his neighbors, and they were going to go and find the boys. He was planning to kill them. I don't know how the sheriff got involved in it, but the sheriff, the chief of police, went and arrested those two little boys, took them to court. The judge said he had a separate trial for the white family, brought them in so they didn't have to face the black ones. Had a trial for those boys and sentenced them to indeterminate sentences. They were going to have to go to a juvenile home until they were 21 years old for kissing the little white girl while they were playing. Meanwhile, while they were in jail, happened to be around Halloween, and the police thought it would be funny to put on Klan robes and scare them. And they did that. They had them in the basement of the jail. Those boys had not seen their mothers since they had been arrested. They were there and did not see their parents until the so-called trial. Well, Robert heard about it, and we started a defense committee for the boys. And Robert was very excellent at getting word out. He wrote up some news releases, and we had a crusade at that time, and we sent out news releases, and we were able to get people all over the country concerned about it. And one Dutch paper ran an editorial saying, and with a picture saying that these little boys were jailed for a kiss. There was a young white reporter who came to our town, and she wanted to do the story, and so Rob and she took her to the place where the boys were held, and they slipped in a camera and took pictures of the little boys. Well, we were able finally to get those little boys released after lots and lots and lots of pressure, because when they their picture appeared on the front page of this Dutch paper, there was a big outcry, and the United States then put pressure on North Carolina, and North Carolina put pressure on our county. But they accused Robert of being a communist, of course, because only communists, would come forth, not good Southern people, to intervene in a case like that. If you get a chance to read Negroes with Guns, there is an account of that story there, and also in Radio Free Dixie.
I'd like to just make a comment about the book Negroes with Guns, because I saw it when I first came out to the Bay Area in July of 1967 in Eldridge Cleaver's apartment. He had a whole case full of them, and he was handing them out. And anybody that came into the Black Panther Party had to get a copy of Negroes with Guns. They had to read it. We had to discuss it. And this notion of self-defense that was in the book was very effective, because Robert Williams, for those of you who haven't read it, Robert Williams pointed out that if there's violent Klansmen who believe fervently in white supremacy, they will come to take your life. But if you're armed, they have to make a calculation. Are they willing to risk their superior life to take your inferior life? So there was an important role to be armed that, in Robert Williams' discussion, reduced the level of violence. And so in the community that I was accustomed to being in the South, all the black people had guns. I mean, it was just not even discussed. You had guns. There'd be a call. It would go out. If, in fact, they heard the Klan was going to ride, everybody would be prepared. And then there was no discussion, there was no parades. In fact, I thought it was odd when I came to Oakland. I said, you know, people would walk around with guns and displaying them and parading around. It just seemed kind of, well, you wouldn't do it in Alabama, but everybody had the guns. But as far as the concept, in '67, there were huge rebellions. In this country, they tried to call them riots. There was uprisings in Detroit in which the U.S. Army in tanks were shooting, you know, house-to-house sniper fighting in Detroit. There was riots and uprisings and rebellions in Newark that thousands of people were arrested and millions of dollars of property damage. And so we thought, the revolutionaries, the Black Power revolutionaries, we thought this was the beginning. You know, this was like insurrection, and it was going to move from insurrection to revolution. And our concept of self-defense was not merely, we will have weapons, so when the terrorists or the police come, we'll be defended. That was definitely a core. But also, the notion of violence that was so pervasive. The black community was subjected to the violence of horrible education, the violence of bad housing, the violence of insults, the violence of the inability to get jobs that are sufficient for your livelihood, being subjected to trials by juries that were against you from the get-go, being sent to prison, not having a fair trial, being sent into the military to fight against people who, on the other side of the world, had done nothing to us. And so these were, in the Black Panther Party, considered forms of violence against which we had to defend ourselves. So this notion of self-defense was broader than weapons, but it did not at all exclude weapons, and that was fundamental. The notion that people had to accept the responsibility of standing up for themselves.
In Monroe, North Carolina, we knew that the power structure in the local town was against us. But we didn't know when we started fighting that the FBI was supporting the power structure, that the federal government was supporting the power structure. We were asking for simple things we thought were simple things, just the right to have a job in a plant that was being supported by tax dollars and government contracts. But they wouldn't give us that, and Robert was one trying to go through channels, asking the federal government to come in and intervene. Look what these people are doing to us. You know, they were oppressing us terribly. But at the same time, not unlike what was happening with them, when the Klan would come out, people would be afraid. That had been our history. The people would go in the houses and close the door and pull down the blinds. They had the guns in there, but they still would be afraid of the Klan. Well, Robert said we should not be afraid of the Klan, because if they're going to invade our communities, we should protect ourselves. Well, he was very much one for obeying the law, and the law said you could carry a gun as long as it wasn't concealed. So he walked around with the Luger on one side, and when we drove our cars around, even during our civil rights movement, we had a gun on the seat of the car. So they were legal. He was trying to stay within the legalities of what the law said, but see, what he knew but did not accept is that the law wasn't meant for us, but he was going to make it be for us. And he said if he would rather die just 5 minutes standing up like a man than crawling at the feet of his oppressors. Fortunately, he never had to kill anybody. I witnessed 3 attempts on his life while the authorities stood there and watched and pretended that they just didn't see. On one occasion, he asked the chief of police, "Did you see that do you hear those shots? We were picketing at a swimming pool, and people were shooting at our demonstrators. And the police chief said, no, I didn't hear anything, Robert. He said, well, I'm glad to know you're hard of hearing, because when we start shooting, you won't hear that either. We were in Monroe, and we had all kinds of demonstrations for, we used the tactical demonstrations of nonviolence, trying to sit down on a lunch stool reserved for white people, and as we would go around to the different drugstores, no less, who had they would sell us the medicine, but we couldn't sit down and have an ice cream cone. So we'd go to the drugstores and so forth. Picketing. Robert was arrested in that incident. We picketed the swimming pool. We asked for one day in the swimming pool if they could not build one in our community. Well, just give us one day. And they said, oh, no, we can't do that. And Rob said, why? They said, we'd have to wash out the pool after you used it. So anyway, that's what spurred us to continue picketing for the right to swim in a tax-supported swimming pool. We had a 10-point program that we presented to the city officials asking for basic human rights, really, and they weren't about to budge because they knew they had the backing of the Klan and the state troopers and the federal government and everybody else. At one time, the Freedom Riders, who were down in Alabama, came in, asked if we would accept them to come in and demonstrate in our hometown to help us. Actually, they wanted to prove that nonviolence worked. And so Robert said, well, you can come in and we will protect you as long as you're in our community. But, I'm not going out there because they know that I am not going to allow anybody to spit in my face or whatever and get away and live. So the Freedom Riders came into our community and supported us, and they had pickets, and we had one white Freedom Rider that came from England, and she was living in the homes of some of our people and picketing along with us. But the officials were calling for support from the Klan and everybody else. They were determined to crush our movement. So Robert told them, said, now wait, I don't think you should demonstrate on Saturday or Sunday, because that's, when all these folks are going to be off work and they're going to be getting their beer and stuff, and this is going to be pretty bad. But they chose to go ahead and demonstrate on Saturday and Sunday. The city officials sprayed insecticide on the picketers while they were going around. James Foreman was there, and he was on the picket line, and when they got ready to leave, Robert had sent the groups of armed men in to bring them out because thousands of racists were surrounding the picketers, and they had begun to shout at them, to kick, spit on them, and so forth. And the police were on the side of the rioters. We were in our community protecting our community, but waiting for them to come back. And all hell had broken loose. People were really upset about what is happening to the young people who were on the demonstration line. And a white couple came into our community, and though Rob kept them from being killed, they said that they had been kidnapped. And then Rob got a telephone call saying, in 30 minutes, you caused a lot of trouble. In 30 minutes, you're going to be hanging from the courthouse square. So he said, come on, get the children, we have to leave. And we left thinking that we would go to New York, wait a while, and then come on back home, let things cool off. When we got to New York, there was a FBI bulletin, all points, saying Rob was armed and dangerous and schizophrenic and should be apprehended. And then at the end it said he's traveling in the company of his family. So we left Monroe thinking we would go back, but once that FBI, he was on the 10 most wanted people list, and his poster was tacked up in post offices all over. Lots of people have those posters now. Couldn't stay, I understand they couldn't stay in the post office because people would steal them for a souvenir. But anyway, we went to Canada thinking, well, our family had to split up. And this is one thing about our movement. Once, when we were in the South, we reached out all over the country and all over the world and created friends all over. Robert was a member of the Fair Play for Cuba committee, and he had traveled around speaking about the way the young boys in the kissing case had been treated. So we had friends all over. We had to break up as a family in New York. I didn't see my children again until after I got to Cuba. 2 boys, 9 and 11. I didn't see Rob again until I got to Cuba. But we were able to survive through that network of friends that we had created all over and eventually end up in Cuba.
Things were heating up while you were in Cuba. A lot of stuff happened in the Bay Area. To make a long story short, Huey Newton was on trial for the shooting of an Oakland policeman named John Fry and the wounding of another one. And the very small local group that had been called the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense was in basically a state of collapse when I got here from California, and I was saying, well, you know, you want to get attention on this case, you should have demonstrations. And we started having demonstrations in front of the courthouse for the leader of the Black Panther Party and getting press. And as the people came out of jail and came back, the party built itself again around this case, around freeing Huey, because we felt this issue of self-defense and the murder that we were subjected to was central to what was going on in the whole country as far as black people were concerned. We could take it from there, and we were organizing a movement to build a party all around the 10-point platforms, and the 10-point platform and the basic principles of human rights and social justice, but the focus was on that trial. The trial was scheduled to start around the 14th or 15th of April 1968. On April 4th, which a day you all remember, maybe not the actual date, but on April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King was murdered in Memphis, where he had been speaking in support of a strike of the sanitation workers. So once he was murdered on, I think it was I don't know what day of the week, April 4th, the whole country changed. There was uprising starting in Memphis, going through the South, going through New York, going through, just 200 cities went up in flames. Washington, D.C. was burning. In the Bay Area, Bobby Seale was actually in hiding because he had been getting threatening notes when he would go to court from the bailiff, say, you come to court, we're gonna kill you, nigger. But we didn't know whether it was really the bailiffs or was it somebody else, and so Eldridge had said, well, you should just lay low, don't go to court till we figure out where they came from. So there was a bench warrant out for him. Well, once King was killed, Charles Gary said, well, we have to, the Bay Area was very tense. I think Charles Gary, the lawyer, got the bench warrant withdrawn, and Bobby Seale and Charles Gary and some other people were going around requesting black communities in the Bay Area not to be destructive, not killing, don't tear up your own community, don't riot. The Black Panther Party office in Berkeley, the headquarters had been moved across the Oakland line. People were jamming the office, asking for guns. They wanted to go out and start shooting. 2 days later, there was an encounter between about 50 Oakland police and 8 Black Panthers in Oakland that ended up in a 90-minute gun battle. I don't think the police knew exactly who they were shooting until it ended, it stopped, and it ended up they were shooting Eldridge Cleaver and Bobby Hutton. And Bobby Hutton came out, they were surrendering, he came out with his hands up, and he was shot and killed, just with bullets. His body was riddled with bullets, and Eldridge had been shot in the leg, and he couldn't stand up, so he was trying to come out. And neighbors in that area had seen what was going on, and they said, don't shoot, don't shoot, don't shoot. So he was arrested, taken off to San Quentin. That's all weekend of April 6th, the same weekend that King was killed. It's totally sort of preposterous when you think about it, but on June, shortly after, he was released on a habeas corpus petition. And in Solano County, they said the parole authorities had not proved that he had violated his parole. They let him out on a bail. I can't remember now whether it was right before, I think it was right before that, Robert Kennedy was murdered in Los Angeles. So this country is kind of off the hinges. Nobody knew what was going on. It was insane, it was crazy. Everybody seemed to be frightened, except those people who were too young to know how frightening it was. I was one of them. And me and a lot of the teenagers who were in the Black Panther Party. So Eldridge was ordered to go back to prison. This habeas corpus thing was overturned. He was ordered to turn himself in, and he said he was afraid to go to San Quentin because if he went to San Quentin, he'd be killed. That's where he'd come from. So he wasn't going to go to, in fact, he made a big speech and told everybody, he said, I didn't leave anything in San Quentin except half my soul and half my heart, and I'm not going back there, I'm going somewhere else. And he disappeared. He eventually ended up in Cuba. I think on Christmas Day, 1968, he arrived in Cuba. I tried to go to Cuba. I tried to join him. It wasn't easy. In fact, it never happened. I discovered after he left that I was pregnant. I wasn't run out of the country. I discovered I was pregnant. I wanted to be with my husband, and the only way, he wasn't coming back to the Bay Area. So I tried to go where he was. Now, the difficulty is that, you're pregnant for a certain number of days. It's like a very specific timeline here. And I kept trying to go and trying to go and trying to go, and it wasn't happening. And so I finally just picked up and went to France and called up Richard Wright's widow, Ellen Wright, and said, help me, I want to get to Cuba. And I ended up being told that I should meet Eldridge Cleaver in Algiers. So I went to Algiers and I met him there. And we stayed for 4 years.
When we got to Cuba, Robert wanted to and told everybody his fight was not in Cuba, his fight was in the United States. So he wanted to establish a radio program. He came up with this idea listening to, he was listening to Voice of America and heard all of the good stuff they were talking about. And he said, we should establish a radio program. And so he went, he presented the idea to Fidel Castro. Well, Fidel said, okay, and told some of the people, help Williams, he knows what he's doing, help him to get his radio program. And of course, we got a good political education at the time too, because there were people who said that the struggle that we were leading and the role that we were playing was going to divide the working class in the United States. So a lot of the people didn't want to see us have a radio program. Or if we had one, they wanted to say what could be said on it. And Robert insisted, well, no, if I'm going to have a radio program, I'll have to make the decision as what to be said on the radio program. So that's, we had a political struggle, but Fidel Castro finally went to Radio Progreso and said, do I have to come down here and put Williams on the radio? He didn't have to come after then. They gave us this radio program, and we had broadcast 3 days a week. We made a tape on Monday, and then it was played Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And Rob did all of his own editorials. People sent us news clippings, newspapers, and I read the news of what was going on in the civil rights struggle in the United States, and tried to let other people know what was going on. Well, at that time, the Cold War was really something. As you know, the Russians were trying to win over the minds of people of color all over the world, and they were also struggling against some political line with the Chinese. Well, when those 3 little girls were blown up in that church in Birmingham, Alabama, Rob sent out telegrams from Cuba to leaders all over the world asking them to speak out against what was happening to our people in the South of the United States. He said then, and he said always, they are under attack. My people are under attack, and the government is planning genocide against us. So we need help. If you speak out and bring attention to what's happening to my people in the United States, maybe they will stop doing what they're doing. Well, there were 2 leaders who responded at that point. One was Prince Sihanouk from Cambodia, and he wrote, he said something, well, the world didn't pay too much attention to what he said, but then Mao Zedong issued a statement, and the statement said he called on the people all over the world to speak out and support the black people in the United States who were struggling against racial discrimination. Well, that really set off something. We were denounced by some of our leaders in the United States at that time. Rob was called everything but a child of God. He was a communist, he was a black nationalist, a black fascist, and everything else. But at that point, we began to, we were invited to China. And when we went to China, we were taken all over. Rob and I used to laugh at the fact that we had to go out of the United States to be recognized as American citizens. We were invited to diplomatic functions with Africans and Asians and all kinds of rallies and so forth. And everywhere we went, Rob spoke about what was happening to our people here in the United States. So we were able to build bridges of friendship with people from one end of Africa to the other end of Asia, all over Europe as well.
By the time the Black Panther Party came along, the notion of international solidarity, because the Black Panther Party here in Oakland didn't start until 1966. That was after, I believe, or maybe around the same time of the OSPAL conference in Havana, which Stokely Carmichael and members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee had gone to, and subsequently the Organization for Solidarity of the Peoples of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Just as an aside, OSPAL made these beautiful, beautiful posters, and they always had the initials of the organization and a gun underneath. That was their logo. there's an art historian who was trying to do some research on revolutionary art, and she came up with this question, and what's this poster agency, OSPAL? But yeah, they had established August 17th as a day of solidarity with African American people. So when we had people visit Cuba, Mexico, I think Bobby Seale and some other members of the Black Panther Party went to, I think it was Montreal, the Hemispheric Conference of Solidarity with the Vietnamese. So there was an international consciousness and dimension and recognition within the Black Panther Party from the time it started. Now, so there was also in existence, I don't think many people in Oakland actually understood that, but there had been in existence in the world, in Africa, North Africa, West Africa, Caribbean, Europe, and the United States, networks of solidarity for Black radicals that continued. And when I said I went to Paris and called Ellen Wright, I was plugging into an existing network that someone who was someone who was one of the leaders of the committee to defend Eldridge Cleaver told me about. So the other thing is that we have to understand that there were countries that had a sense of solidarity with our struggle. There's COINTELPRO functioning within, counterintelligence programs functioning within the United States to interfere with our activities, but there's analogous programs to interfere with our international connections. And so in the case of Eldridge Cleaver, he was told through his intermediaries that when he went to Cuba, he would be able, as he requested, to set up a training base and bring Black Panthers there. And he didn't want to go to Cuba to stay. He wanted to go to Cuba and come back as a guerrilla. When I met him, I mean, you might think this is strange, but I met Eldridge Cleaver at a conference in 1967 in Nashville. It was a SNCC conference, and he had just gotten out of San Quentin, and he was talking then. He wanted to go to the mountains. He wanted to do Mankata. I mean, he was just, his idea of revolution, and I think a lot of brothers who were in prison had an idea of revolution that was very physical. It was not a metaphysical idea, it was a very physical idea, and they were going to band together, and they were going to set up base camps, and they were going to fight. So he went to Cuba thinking that he was going to be able to do this, and he discovered that the agreements that were made in New York weren't translated into Havana, and that he was told, you can come here as a private citizen, and you're perfectly welcome, and you can bring your wife, but you have to live here quietly as a private citizen. Someone, the very week that I finally decided I'm tired of waiting on somebody to tell me I can come to Cuba, I just decided to leave. That same week, someone released the story to Reuters that said Eldridge Cleaver was in Cuba. He was there, but it was secret. So I get off the plane in Paris, and I pick up the newspaper, and there's this front page story, Eldridge Cleaver's hiding in Havana. And I said, okay, how'd this get in the paper? It wasn't supposed to be there. So this is the violation of the agreement that you're supposed to live here privately. So he's told, you can't stay here, you should have to leave, but you can come back later. So he leaves, he goes to Algiers, I go to Algiers. It turns out that the Ministry of Information of the Algeria, which is a member of the Organization of African Unity, the OAU. The OAU is organizing the first Pan-African Cultural Festival, and it's being hosted in Algiers. So when we get there, we discover that there are people who are looking to send us invitations to come to the first Pan-African Cultural Festival, but it's not until the end of July, and we're there at the beginning of June. So they tell us basically just have to lay low, be quiet, and things worked out. They worked out especially because, not because we had such good contacts, but because Eldridge had been in Cuba and he met in Algiers an English-speaking representative of the ZAPU, Zimbabwe African People's Union, who had also been in Cuba as a student. His name was Charles Chikorima. Charles Chikorima came and said, oh, my brother, we're so happy to see you. And then he told him his problem, his situation. He was in an awkward position vis-a-vis the Algerian government and the Cuban government. That awkward position being the Algerian government had no idea that he was there, because he came in on a Cuban passport with a Cuban name. And so it was worked out by other Africans, and we found a network within Algiers of Algerians, of Africans who were fighting for their independence from Guinea-Bissau, from Angola, in Angola, in the ANC. In fact, it was a woman in the ANC delegation, because we said, well, where can we go? We're here, but where else can we go in Africa? She said, this is it. Coming from America, there is nowhere else you can go, because no other country other than Algeria is willing to stand up to the United States. And so what we were doing was what we thought we had to do to continue. We wanted to maintain our struggle, continue, live there, ask for recognition as a liberation movement. The United States State Department had a document, which I heard about many, many years later, and their document was stating that it was very imperative that the black militants in the United States do not make links with the Arab and African revolutionaries, which is exactly what we spent 3 or 4 years over there doing. So you can imagine the kind of intelligence activity being targeted against us in Algiers.
I might mention that Charles Chikorema was a student when we went to Cuba and spent many hours with Robert talking about and trying to connect our movement.
That's solidarity.
What self-defense actions or models would be appropriate today?
I think, first of all, we have to recognize that we still have a problem. And the problem is that we need to defend ourselves against what's happening to us. Whether or not we need to defend our younger generation. We look at the statistics of black males especially, who are either on drugs, in jail, or dead. We need to defend our young men. We need to defend our people. Now, how we defend them, I can't give you the answer to that. Rob used to say, if you want to see your Savior, look in the mirror. Another thing is that we like to look at problems and say, oh yeah, we have a problem, it's them, it's them. Those drug addicts, those guys walking around with their pants down to here, you know, all of them. Oh, I'm afraid of them too, you know. But that's by design. And we have to recognize the fact. I think most of us know that it's by design. It is a genocidal thing that's going on against the young people. They deliberately are not educating them. They're not giving them the opportunity. They're not giving them the opportunity to have jobs and so forth. So we have to recognize, first of all, we got a problem. The one thing we learned from the South is the reason they didn't want to attack the problem, they said they didn't have any problem. We know we've got a problem. And self-defense means defending ourselves against that problem, that those evil forces that want to push us back into the Stone Age.
When the small group of Black Panthers were in Algiers, it was very isolated, and we were not under any particular military assault, but there were a lot of problems involved in maintaining any kind of political or social cohesion. I began to think we were like a band of fugitive slaves. And that problem is that within the society that's constructed in the United States, it's premised on a very institutionalized and sophisticated form of domination that's racially based. It's racially based domination that those who challenge it, who don't want to be a part of it, if you're anti-racist, if you're trying, repudiate racism, you try and confront it, you try and end it, you're going to find yourself, if you're really, really serious, on the outs, you're going to find yourself essentially some kind of fugitive status. Either you're intellectually a fugitive or you're imprisoned, you're not central. Now, I think this is absolutely and totally wrong. I think that the human rights and the struggle for human rights is what's central, and that the country and the government have been kidnapped by evil corporate capitalist interests using it for their own purposes. So, how do fugitives defend themselves? They had communal solidarity, they had secret organizations, and they had to develop a system of supporting themselves from the larger society. Essentially, it's a form of covert solidarity and to survive essentially on a war footing. And the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement and the human rights movement are attacked as if we are targets of their warfare. And we just have to get that very clear. And therefore, the manner in which you said, yes, it is culturally, and I think you said it's contextual. But how do we defend ourselves? And one of the first things we have to do is have solid, trustworthy organizations, lots of organizations, networks. We need to educate and improve how we think about ourselves, how we think about each other.
Can there be a revolution without a radical feminism? And the other question says, how did your movement challenge male supremacy, and what advice would you give to revolutionary women of color?
You don't have any movements without women being fully involved. It just don't happen. Take the women out of the civil rights movement, it falls apart. Take the women out of the Black Panther Party, it fell apart a long time ago, okay? So the issue is not participation, it's a form of acknowledgement and recognition, which I think is now. I think that's happening now more than it was happening then. The participation was there, but the discussion of it is now. The language that many of you use to discuss women's participation is a new language that was created by that struggle. I think what you have to say is the 100% complete, full participation, respect for women. Now, if that's radical feminism, I'm not sure, but, and not only that, in periods that are horribly repressed and depressed, which was the case in the pre-Civil Rights Act South, you have to have women leaders because of the level of the repression. And it just seems to me that the mistakes and stupidities and errors that led to some of the problems in the Black liberation movement, which those of you who are participants all know about, whether you want to talk about it is another thing. Had there been more discussion, and I've heard this from men, more discussion and more recognition of the ways in which women would choose to make decisions and think, there would have been less stupidity. So therefore, to improve the organization and improve the direction, I think there has to be very clear recognition of women in leadership positions.
I've had the question asked to me, how do you feel being in the shadows of your husband who was always out front, and people talked about him? The power structure used that, I think, to split up our movement. I said, well, hey, I feel fine. I'm fighting for my rights just like he's fighting for his. We are fighting together for the rights of our people. We have to fight together for the rights of our people. If we're going to fight behind closed doors. If we don't unite together, the men and the women, what are our children going to do? I don't care if my name ever gets out there. If we make moves forward for our children, then that's what we're all about. That's what the struggle is about. I've got to love him, I've got to love my sister, I've got to love my children, I've got to love my people in order to fight this liberation struggle. The other stuff, you know, we can deal with that later. But the main ingredient is unity while we fight this struggle that is killing us all.
Well, I think it's very clear that the way in which the power structure that is harming our environment and harming our school systems and robbing us of the resources. Resources are socially produced, but they seem to be individually distributed, okay? So there's not much, I say if this is a democracy, it's a commercial democracy. Every dollar is equal, but every person isn't equal, okay? So in order to protect that kind of inequality, racial discrimination and racial divisions and classifications of groups are used to keep people fighting each other so that they can have Asian Americans say, oh yes, you're the model minority and you get good grades, and if it wasn't for such and such, all the students at UC Berkeley would be Asian, okay? And then they can, at the same time, say, well, we're not going to have any affirmative action, so there won't be any black students. There's this repudiation of the manner in which the black struggle and black people's struggle have consistently changed the way in which resources are distributed, made this society legally, politically, socially, and racially more accessible. And so what I think, and I think I heard Greg Morizumi talk about this, in the political education of the young organizations that are starting, and many in the Bay Area are multicultural or multi-ethnic, there has to be some recognition of how that, an understanding of how that black struggle pushed back racism and how racism functions within the society, so that we can get to what they call in South Africa, I believe they call it non-racial, right? A non-racial way of thinking. But we can't just leap over it. I hope that answers the question.
This person asks, now since COINTELPRO is legal through the Patriot Act, would you encourage people to engage in grassroots organizing to take power back instead of participating in voting?
I don't think that's an either or. It's like you're going to say, well, we have this tool, but we don't want to use that one because that's boring. I don't know. I just think too many people died to have the right to vote. The electoral system is a problem. But you have to be a participant. I mean, that's what the whole point of having a voice. And then when they take your voice away, then you move on. But you don't take it away from yourself. That's my view.
I agree. I think that until we address the issue of why our young people are out there killing each other, we can't just isolate them and turn them loose to continue killing each other. Let me tell a quick story. China was a sovereign nation, and when the British came to China first, they came and had to take lessons before they could go before the emperor. In a few short years after they had been in China, and after they had introduced opium to China, they were able to go in there and they established a park which said, no dogs or Chinese allowed. Opium, you've heard about opium being, you know what opium does. And all of you know what drugs introduced into our communities by the power structure has done and is doing and continues to do to our young men and women. Need I say more?
Well, this issue of young men killing each other, I think there's a fundamental issue of principle and understanding. I mean, why and how are they doing it? What are their values? What are their principles? I mean, one of the fundamental ways of organizing basic social change is to create a fundamental respect and valuing of the whole person and their talents, and to give them a sense of belonging to something that's bigger than themselves, and that they can bring their talents to change the future. And I don't think young people who think like that kill each other. And I think young people who are deprived of the sense of their being valuable, or deprived of the sense of having an impact on the future, or deprived of a sense of love and commitment in the people around them, they're very angry. They're really, really very angry. In fact, they might not believe in anything. And I think we have to get under why we're having this violence and what is it about, as opposed to just saying, well, they're killing people, let's squash them.
The next one is, do you believe nonviolent revolution is possible in the United States or around the world, and why or why not?
Do you think the man is going to give it up? Do you think that 2% that is controlling 90% of the world's resources is going to say, oh, let's just stop what we're doing here? I don't think so.
That response reminds me of a question that I wanted to make sure that we talked about, was the thing that you brought up, Kathleen, which was the role of humor in revolution, and kind of how essential you saw it as being to a revolution. I wonder if you can talk a little bit.
Well, yeah, I want everybody to understand. The people who've been in movements know this, but a lot of you haven't had the opportunity, you're too young, or you think revolutionaries are horribly serious people. You always see them scowling and screaming. In fact, I remember a friend of mine was asked if he was going to the memorial service for Kwame Ture. He said, no, I don't want to be yelled at. But I just think that the understanding that risking your life, risking everything that matters, is not it's not done easily, but once you make that commitment, then you're in a connection with people. And you have to express your joy in life, whether you're in prison, whether you're in the struggle. I mean, the people I'm familiar, I just recently happened to see a documentary with Robert Williams in it. It was hysterical. I mean, this thing, he said the Klan, a telephone, death threat came from one of the Klansmen. And he said in the background he could hear the Klansman telling his wife, Stella, leave me alone. Get out the way. And so he recognized this voice. And when the next time the Klansman called up, he recognized the voice, and Robert Williams said, now how's sweet Stella doing? There was something I read just recently that Eldridge Cleaver had written. I read it in a book that I just saw at a used bookstore there, and he said, I used to call them devils and beasts, but everyone seemed much happier when I called them imperialists and colonialists. So I think it's part of the way we communicate. It's important to understand that it's crucial and that it's not wrong. In fact, we should cultivate humor and kindness in our struggle.
And I really, really want to thank Kathleen Cleaver and Mabel Williams for sharing with us tonight.